Is it great love or something deeply toxic and dangerous? Sparks fly between the handsome uncle and his teenage niece, and House of the Dragon viewers are eagerly rooting for this incestuous relationship with a significant age gap. Is something wrong with us? It's probably safe to assume that most viewers are well aware that what's unfolding on screen isn't entirely okay. But this is the Game of Thrones universe. We're used to it. We have experience cheering for romances between aunts and nephews.
It's cold up here for a southern girl.
So keep your queen warm.
HBO has a knack for creating characters so well written and performed, often by charismatic and attractive actors, that whatever they do on screen won't diminish our sympathy. We'll turn a blind eye to many things, simply stating that Targaryen's gonna Targaryen. But it would be a shame to stop there, because House of the Dragon, through the relationship between Daemon and Rhaenyra, has quite a bit to say about relationships where power dynamics are skewed and about the dangerous phenomenon of grooming. Hi, it's Captain Spoiler here, overthinking pop culture, and we're about to dive deep into spoiler territory, so consider yourself warned. House of the Dragon is a fantasy prequel to Game of Thrones, set nearly 200 years before the events of HBO's flagship hit. The action takes place in a world inspired by the Middle Ages. In this setting, we follow the royal lineage of dragon riders, the Targaryens, and the political turmoil surrounding the succession to the throne of the current king, Viserys. Key players in this game include the king's firstborn daughter, Rhaenyra, and his brother, Daemon. While it might seem they would be primarily rivals, we watch their relationship develop from episode to episode, eventually turning into intimacy and, after many twists and turns, marriage. Viewers love this couple, but that doesn't change the fact that their relationship isn't the healthiest.
I brought you something.
A lot of things can be said about Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship, but normal isn't one of them. First of all, we're dealing with an uncle and niece, so essentially incest. However, the incest motif is somewhat inherent in the tradition of this royal family, whose members have already interbred in much closer kinship relationships. Much more important from the perspective of this analysis is their age difference, and consequently, the difference in life experiences. At the start of the series, Rhaenyra is 14. She enjoys flying her dragon, gossiping with her friend about ladies of the court and handsome knights, and isn't particularly drawn to the prospect of becoming someone's wife and mother. We can assume she's a fairly typical Westerosi teenager from the upper class, if we don't count the dragon and all the succession drama. Daemon, the black sheep of the family, is 31 at the start of the series. So there's a 17-year age difference between them. Daemon is rebellious, disrespectful of authority, walks his own path, has something dangerous about him, can be brutal. He's the bad boy almost every teenager falls for at some point, and he immediately became a fan favorite of the series. A 17-year age gap is a lot, at least by our contemporary standards. One could argue that in Westeros it's nothing unusual, given the Middle Ages-like setting, noble families, political marriages. But even if large age differences in relationships are common in the world of the series, it doesn't negate their impact on the relationship dynamics. Just because something is common doesn't mean it's good and healthy.
She is 12.
She will mature.
The relationship between Daemon and Rhaenyra is close. So much so that from the beginning we sense it's more than just a teenager fascinated by her favorite uncle. The uncle also treats her in a special way, and as we'll see in later episodes, he tightens this bond more and more. What does Daemon want from Rhaenyra? Is it simply love and destiny? Many viewers, despite the disturbing signs, would like to think so. Or is it a political calculation? Daemon isn't stupid. He knows he's not popular, that he has no support at court, and no one wants to see him as king. Without causing total chaos, the closest he could get to the throne would be through marriage to Rhaenyra. Daemon is a complex, complicated, ambiguous character, and presumably his motivations are too. But what I find most interesting is the mechanism by which his relationship with Rhaenyra progresses, because upon closer examination, it becomes quite clear that Daemon is using elements of grooming on the girl.
I thought you might go to him, offer him comfort.
In his chambers.
You might wear one of your mother's dresses.
Grooming is a term describing a specific type of manipulation. It refers to a situation where one person intentionally builds a close emotional and/or romantic bond with another to reduce their resistance and make it easier to exploit them for their own purposes. They shower the person with attention, distinguish them from others, build trust, become friends, or make them fall in love, all while having hidden intentions. A person who engages in grooming plays a long-term game, manipulating and molding their chosen victim, and sometimes their environment as well. Anyone who has watched the series A Friend of the Family knows how a cunning predator can wrap an entire family around their finger to ensure unlimited access to a child.
I was just calling to make sure it'd be all right with you if I took Jen horseback riding after a piano lesson.
We most often talk about grooming in the context of sexual abuse, but it can also apply to other types of exploitation in many different contexts, such as cults, financial fraud, exploitation in the workplace, relationships where one partner controls the other. Victims of grooming are most often people who, due to their age, emotional state, lack of experience, or difficult life situation, are more susceptible to manipulation and exploitation. This often affects children or teenagers, but it also happens to many adults. Although we most often think of grooming in the context of crimes, it is a much more common phenomenon and occurs to varying degrees in many types of relationships, even those that don't always arouse our suspicion from the outside.
They're sweet, aren't they?
Very.
Grooming can occur, for example, in relationships with a large age difference, especially when the younger partner is still very young and just entering adulthood, and the older partner, using their advantage, authority, and experience, molds them according to their own preferences, subordinates them to their vision, and exerts control over them. Grooming can take many different forms, and the goals of the person using this type of manipulation can vary. It can be sex, money, or a sense of power over others. Sometimes people resort to manipulation when they can't build a relationship on healthy grounds, and the only way to maintain the relationship is to control their partner. The motivations can be very different, but the overall mechanism is the same: to condition the other person to accept or at least passively endure control, abuse, and boundary violations as an integral part of the relationship, to get close to them, to entangle them in a close relationship and gain enough control to prevent them from escaping their influence, and often even to convince them that they want to be in this relationship, to continue it and deepen it. From a psychological point of view, grooming is something very tricky and leaves deep wounds. In the eyes of the person experiencing it, the relationship initially seems safe, good, even exceptional compared to their other contacts. You get involved in it, you trust the other person, they are often an authority figure for you. And they use your trust and your feelings to cross your boundaries and hurt you in one way or another. Psychologically, it's a very tangled situation because the same person is both a source of suffering and relief for you. The manipulator knows they have to maintain balance, feed and nurture your attachment to avoid losing access to you and what they want to get from you. They can also manipulate to create the impression that you are co-responsible for what is happening. They make you believe that you provoked them, that you caused this situation, that you suggested the idea, that they're somehow under your influence.
You seduced me.
But I was 13 years old.
Don't give me that.
But I was.
I don't care.
Your guilt and disorientation work in their favor, delaying the moment when you'll be able to realize that something is very wrong and that this person is exploiting you. Sometimes you may not notice it for a long time, accepting the crossing of your boundaries as a natural consequence of a given relationship. Especially young people who lack experience and comparison find it difficult to distinguish healthy treatment from what someone much older who is a kind of authority figure for them paints as a picture of an adult relationship. It's easy to assume that they know better because they have more life experience and that it's you who has to adapt. In some cases, understanding what really happened in the relationship only comes years later with gaining distance, experience, points of reference, and self-awareness.
Yeah, we were lovers too.
You and Bill? Mm-hmm. But how old were you? 13?
Although in recent years, with influence of the Me Too movement, there have been some films and series honestly addressing the issue and showing what grooming is and what its consequences are, popular culture does have a shameful tradition of romanticizing this type of relationship, where one side has significantly more power in the relationship than the other. And because of this, we as viewers are somehow conditioned to perceive various problematic scenarios in terms of romantic gestures and great love. All it takes is a couple of attractive actors, and we already want to believe that a vampire with 100 years more life experience is the perfect partner for a 17-year-old. Similarly, the series' relationship between Damon and Rhaenyra, despite all its confusion and problematic elements, was very enthusiastically received by a large part of the audience. Apparently, chemistry they have on screen overshadows the red flags for us, or makes us willing to turn a blind eye to them in order to be seduced by the story and the characters. But those red flags are there, flying in the sky like dragons over Valyria, and now we're going to take a closer look at them.
I would give you many children of pure Valyrian blood, so that we might strengthen the royal line and the realm.
Is that what your father told you to say?
Grooming can have different faces, but it is possible to distinguish several of its elements or stages commonly described in publications on the subject. A groomer operates much like a predator, seeking out the weakest member of the pack, the easiest target. It's significantly easier to isolate and manipulate someone who is lonely and burdened by various problems than someone surrounded by a support network and coping well with life and their own emotions. The various difficulties we face lower our guard, making us crave comfort and support, which in turn makes us less critical of someone who suddenly offers assistance. Problems at home, loneliness, mental health issues, poverty, experiencing family or peer violence, these are all factors that make us more vulnerable and susceptible to manipulation. The second important factor is access to the victim. Perpetrators look for them in their immediate surroundings or consciously create favorable circumstances, for example, by placing themselves in professions where they have access to a pool of potential victims who fit their preferences. That's why many cases of abuse occur in families or circles of people connected to the family, because the victim is at hand. And that's why the most notorious cases we hear about in the media often involve people who have conveniently positioned themselves in a place where their contact with the victim is easier to hide, like a coach working with young athletes or a teacher at school. Damon has quite easy access to Rhaenyra. He's her uncle. He frequently visits and sometimes even resides at her father's court, making him a constant presence in her life. Despite being married, he maintains little to no contact with his wife, Lady Rhea Royce, and openly disparages her. Apparently, she's not his type, as he seems to prefer young girls with silver hair. We know this from a small piece of dialogue from a scene in his favorite brothel. When he's having a bad night, the prostitute that knows him very well offers him a silver-haired maiden, implying that a girl resembling a Targaryen could help. That suggests that either his obsession with his young niece is well known, at least in his favorite pleasure house, or he does have a very incestuous type and inclination towards young girls. And it's that what drove him towards Rhaenyra in the first place? But does Rhaenyra fit the profile of a grooming victim? At 14, she's incredibly young and has likely had a special relationship with her uncle for years. Her age alone makes her susceptible to the influence of someone much older, especially someone she may perceive as an authority figure. Society often prematurely categorizes girls of this age as adults, simply because their bodies start to resemble that of a grown woman. But in doing so, we overlook the fact that teenagers are not fully developed psychologically, intellectually, and emotionally. Their brains are not fully formed, as the prefrontal cortex associated with planning, decision-making, understanding consequences, and regulating emotional and social behavior is still growing until the age of 25. We can't expect that a 14-year-old would be emotionally and intellectually ready to be an equal in a relationship with a 30-ish uncle. When we consider that Rhaenyra and Daemon's relationship may have extended beyond typical uncle-niece interactions for a significant period, since she was a child, it becomes evident how vulnerable she would have been to his influence. She's not completely deprived of agency, but we cannot burden her with responsibility for what's going on between her and her uncle. He's the adult in this situation, and therefore holding much more power.
Yes, I was a child. And look at what my life became without you.
At the start of the series, Rhaenyra is not without a support network. She has loving parents and a friend, and she's a royal princess, so her life is pretty comfortable and safe. Later, with death of her mother and her father's decision to remarry, she starts to feel alone and somewhat pushed to the sidelines. She grieves her mother and has trouble connecting with her father, which leaves Daemon as the only adult with whom she has an actual relationship. But even in the first episode, when her mother is still alive, there is a particular area where she could feel insecure. Her father's desperate desire for a male heir has created an implicit message. She is insufficient. She needs to be replaced with a boy. She's not enough in the eyes of her father and the realm. This can make her more susceptible to seeking validation elsewhere. If her uncle can make her feel special and valued, she may be more inclined to trust and rely on him. Once a manipulator has identified a suitable target, they gradually cultivate a relationship. Starting with small gestures, they gradually position themselves as a friend, offering help, listening, and providing advice. Their goal is to create a safe and trusting environment, not just for the victim, but sometimes for their surroundings as well. They'll share personal details to appear open and encourage the victim to reciprocate. In such situations, it's incredibly difficult to detect any suspicious behavior. The manipulator often comes across as a genuinely wonderful person who simply wants to be friends or is romantically interested. Their initial charm can be so convincing that the victim often feels special and unique. In House of the Dragon, we're introduced to Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship at a point where this trust-building phase is already complete. Daemon has had years, since Rhaenyra was very young, to establish himself as a significant figure in her life, gaining her trust and affection. Their very first interaction that we see in Episode 1 reveals a close bond that sets them apart from others. Rhaenyra is the first to know of her uncle's return and seeks him out privately before the news reaches the king. The tension and intimacy in their conversation are undeniable, hinting at a deeper connection. Daemon's gift for her, a Valyrian steel necklace, further solidifies this bond in the audience's eyes. The way Daemon presents the gift carries a romantic undertone, suggesting a level of intimacy that is inappropriate for an uncle and niece. Such gestures, along with favors, are common tactics used by manipulators to foster dependency and loyalty. For a manipulator, identifying an unmet need in their victim is crucial. By providing exactly what the victim desires, the manipulator becomes indispensable. Whether it's the need to feel attractive, the desire for possessions beyond one's family's means, or the longing for adult companionship, understanding these unmet needs allows the manipulator to exploit them. In Rhaenyra's case, Daemon's unique approach to her stands out. Unlike other adults in her life, he doesn't treat her like a child. Her parents, while loving, often view her from a parental perspective, either instructing or patronizing her. Her father's advisors ignore her, and the servants don't count. Daemon, however, engages with her seemingly as an equal. In their first scene together, their conversation is characterized by a sense of mutual respect and wit. Daemon is the first adult in the series to treat Rhaenyra with such equality, avoiding condescension or dismissing her thoughts as childish. It's no wonder that she feels special, mature, and understood in his presence. Abuse and manipulation thrive on secrecy. A groomer will go to great lengths to keep their relationship or specific aspects of it hidden. If these actions were exposed, someone might intervene. To maintain secrecy, they may make requests, issue threats, engage in emotional blackmail, or concoct elaborate lies. They might even emphasize the uniqueness of the relationship, suggesting that it's so special it must be kept secret from the world. In Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship, secrecy is prevalent. In their very first scene together, we see them meet in secret. Later in the first season, Daemon secretly helps Rhaenyra escape the castle for nighttime adventures. Their conversations often feel private and coded. In the first season, they're the only main characters who consistently communicate and have actual, meaningful conversations in High Valyrian, the language of dragons. Throughout the series, other characters, with exception of Aemond in Season 2, don't use High Valyrian at all or do it only for specific purposes like giving short commands to dragons or during ceremonies like weddings and funerals. The fact that even King Viserys, despite his fascination with Valyrian history, almost never speaks High Valyrian highlights the exclusivity of their communication. This linguistic barrier further emphasizes the secret nature of their relationship. We may wonder if it was Daemon who taught her the language, using this opportunity to bond with his niece. A manipulator can only gain complete control over their victim when that person is isolated from their support network. Other significant people in the victim's life pose a threat, both because they might notice something amiss, intervene in the suspicious relationship, and stop the manipulator, and because they undermine the manipulator's influence. The manipulator aims to become the emotional center of the victim's life, the sole answer to their needs, and the antidote to their feelings of loneliness. This is difficult to achieve if the victim also has close relationships with friends or family members. Therefore, the manipulator will eventually begin to discredit important people in the victim's life, mocking them and diminishing their importance. They will undermine your relationships with others to isolate you and make you more dependent on them. They'll convince you that no one else truly understands you, that others don't have your best interests at heart, and they'll distort intentions of your family members and friends and provoke conflicts. All of this is done to corner you and deprive you of external support. In the 4th episode of Season 1, we follow Rhaenyra's and Daemon's nighttime escapade to the city, which ends in scandal, court gossip, her father's anger, and a final rift between Rhaenyra and her childhood friend. The princess is seen in the last place she should be, in a brothel, in the company of her uncle, and in a highly improper situation. This is no accident. All evening, Daemon and Rhaenyra wandered the city incognito, disguising their silver hair characteristic of Valyrian houses. After entering the brothel, Daemon removes her hat, exposing the princess. Daemon wanted Rhaenyra to be seen in this place and situation. He knew perfectly well that his favorite haunts were under surveillance, as he had already gotten into trouble when the crown was informed of a controversial speech he gave there one time. Daemon wanted to expose Rhaenyra to gossip and ruin her reputation so that no decent lord would want to marry her, forcing her father to give her to him. The next day, we see him demanding this from Viserys during their confrontation.
Wed her to me. When I offered up my crown, you said I could have anything. I want Rhaenyra.
Perhaps he sensed, and rightly so, that his brother would not agree to this marriage under normal circumstances. So, he decided to dramatically tarnish the princess's reputation to win her for himself. If Viserys had given in, Daemon would have had the very young 18-year-old Rhaenyra all to himself, far from her previous environment. If Viserys had refused but not expelled Daemon from the castle, Rhaenyra would still have been isolated from her loved ones, who reacted very badly to the news of her nighttime escapade and the lies she used to cover it up.
This is a vile accusation. Is it? You Targaryens do have queer customs.
Only King Viserys' unusual firmness, his rejection of Daemon, and the hasty marriage of Rhaenyra to someone else paradoxically saved her from falling completely under her uncle's control. In the end, Daemon managed to isolate her and deprive her of support, but he wasn't able to benefit from it. After establishing a bond and gaining trust, the groomer gradually introduces sexual themes to their victim. This is especially important with very young victims or children who may be experiencing these concepts for the first time. Abruptly exposing them to explicit sexual content or behavior could be too shocking and risk ending the relationship or leading to disclosure. Therefore, the topic is introduced gradually, starting with subtle gestures, almost innocent touching, conversations or situations that normalize nudity, like changing clothes together. Scenes from movies or even pornographic material can also be used to desensitize the victim. The boundaries are gradually pushed further and further. Given the structure of the series, which shows us snippets over several years, it's difficult to assess how many of these grooming gestures occurred in Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship before the intimacy line was finally crossed in the 4th episode. We've only seen the famous necklace putting on scene from the 1st episode, and then the topic resurfaced in more explicit terms around the middle of the season. To Daemon's credit, he at least had the decency to wait until Rhaenyra was about 18 before crossing the final sexual boundary. At this point, she was already thinking about it herself, given the prospect of marriage. The 4th episode rapidly advances the process of sexualization in their relationship. The topic of sex first emerges theoretically in a conversation where Rhaenyra confides her fears about marriage and being trapped in an unsatisfying union. Daemon offers her practical advice, suggesting that she find a lover. Later, sex returns in a visual form when, during their nighttime escapade to the city, Daemon takes her to a crowded brothel he frequents, allowing her to observe people engaging in various sexual acts. Ultimately, the boundary is crossed physically within this establishment, though the act is not fully consummated. Damon withdraws halfway through, leaving her alone and disoriented. Perhaps that's all he needed to start rumors about the princess?
I have discomforting news. I'm afraid it concerns the princess, my king.
Or perhaps he realizes what he's doing and is struck by a pang of conscience. In this scene, we see that Rhaenyra eagerly returns the first kiss, which leads to everything else. But let's not be fooled. She's not calling the shots that night. He's her guide through the nighttime city, plying her with alcohol, taking her to his favorite haunts, and showing her his preferences. Moreover, in secret, he's executing his own hidden agenda, deliberately damaging her reputation. Do you really think that if someone asked the princess that morning how she imagined her first time, she would say she wanted to do it dressed as a commoner, under the eyes of her future subjects, in the middle of a brothel? Or perhaps she was simply placed in this particular situation, and combined with her feelings for her uncle, she followed the path he'd laid out. The final key element of grooming is exerting control. After gaining trust, isolating the victim from others, and creating emotional dependency, the manipulator can become increasingly demanding. They've created a situation where the victim is highly reliant and emotionally attached, and they continually manipulate the victim's emotions to prevent them from leaving. They maintain a constant balance between inflicting pain and providing relief. They're both the poison and the antidote. They alternately hurt and make you feel special. And when they hurt you, you have no one else to turn to, so you return to them for comfort. At this stage, the victim is often emotionally lost. They may feel shame, guilt, helplessness, and believe they are responsible for what's happening. They might rationalize or romanticize certain things to reduce cognitive dissonance and bridge the gap between their feelings for the other person and how they're being treated. They might feel unhappy in the relationship, but believe they can't live without it. The boundaries of what is considered normal become blurred. The manipulator deconstructs the victim's identity and reconstructs it from pieces that suit their purposes and that they can control. The victim loses themselves and gradually becomes an embodiment of the manipulator's fantasies. If this cycle is not interrupted, it can last for years, even a lifetime. Throughout the series, and especially in the 4th episode, we see how Daemon shapes Rhaenyra, filling her head with his own beliefs. He becomes her mentor, her teacher of real life, and she absorbs these teachings wholeheartedly. And in later years, she puts them into practice.
And what do you propose?
That we perform our duty to our fathers and to the realm, and when it's done, each of us dines as we see fit.
In fact, when they reunite after years of separation, she directly tells him that she followed his advice, as if seeking approval and confirmation that she's done well. We can assume that what we see on screen is not the only instance where Daemon directly influences her life choices and developing personality. As her uncle, he was a constant presence in her life, even if they didn't see each other for months at a time. As a grown, attractive man who gives her attention and treats her differently than other adults, he naturally positioned himself as someone she could admire, imitate, and seek approval from. In the 4th episode, we see not only how Daemon molds Rhaenyra herself, but also how he manipulates the circumstances of her life to achieve his own goal. It's hard to argue that he has her best interests at heart when he ruins her reputation, undermines her position, and exposes her to gossip and humiliation. His actions in this episode fit the pattern of poison and antidote. First, he puts her in a terrible situation, and then he offers a solution that was his goal from the beginning. However, Rhaenyra proves to be not as unaware as we might expect. She seems to see through his intentions and the hidden purpose of their trip to the brothel after the incident. She confronts him about it when they meet again at her pre-wedding celebration, to which Daemon has invited himself. Daemon tries to provoke jealousy by flirting with Laena Velaryon, almost as if to show that if she's marrying someone else, he can be interested in another woman. Eventually, Daemon and Rhaenyra have a conversation, and there's a spark between them, visible to all the guests. Daemon tries to undermine her decision to marry Laenor, as if she had any say in the matter after what he's done to her. But she responds by showing that she's seen through him, daring him to kidnap her and make her his wife. There's a hint of anger in her voice, but it's hard not to get the impression that she might actually want that outcome. After these words, Daemon grabs her neck in a gesture that teeters on the edge between passion and violence. Who knows how this situation would have unfolded if it hadn't been interrupted by a fight between other guests? Taking advantage of the chaos, Damon slips away alone. Perhaps he's not ready to betray his brother so openly. Or perhaps the fact that Rhaenyra is beginning to stand up to him throws him off balance. The series interrupts their relationship at this crucial point. Damon and Rhaenyra are separated for about a decade, each going their own way. During this time, they both build other, seemingly healthier relationships. It's likely that this gives Rhaenyra a few years to gain distance, knowledge, and experience, to better understand herself, and to build healthier relationships with other men, her husband and her lover. And although Damon and Rhaenyra eventually reunite, their relationship takes a slightly different path than it would have if the girl had remained under her uncle's influence the entire time. Even then, however, control and the need for power remain important elements and a flashpoint in this second adult phase of their relationship.
I see you have done well here.
They are sworn to me. And not a moment too soon.
And to whom are you sworn?
After a decade apart, an adult Rhaenyra, now around 28, reunites with her uncle at a family gathering. Initially, we see her uncertain, glancing at him from a distance, a little fearfully. Eventually, she decides to speak with him privately during a walk on the beach. She updates him on her current situation, recounts her life, and with a mix of pride and a search for approval, shows him that she has followed his advice, finding joy beyond the confines of marriage. He listens with a smile that could just as easily be amusement as self-satisfaction. Finally, Rhaenyra reproaches him for abandoning her and leaving her without support when she needed him most. And he, significantly, replies that he spared her because she was still a child, as if he'd learned something from his behavior. For Rhaenyra, her being so young is no excuse for her uncle's actions. It only deepens her sense of abandonment. She accuses him of making her life a tragedy ever since he left her as a defenseless child. There's a lot of emotional intensity in this conversation. There's resentment, but also a seeking of her uncle's approval, a probing to see if he's been happy with another woman, and a somewhat uncertain admission that she's found joy with someone else. Ultimately, Rhaenyra initiates a kiss, convincing the hesitant uncle that she's no longer a child and that she desires him. They make love under the cover of night and the wreck of a ship, a bare wooden skeleton that somewhat resembles the twisted, damaged foundations of their relationship. And during the act, we get a surprising shot of Rhaenyra looking directly into the camera, as if she wants to say something with that look, that she's finally gotten what she's wanted since childhood. If so, there's also a certain tragedy in that look when you consider how much those desires were her own, and how much they were implanted in her at a very young age. A few scenes later, we see Rhaenyra asking her uncle for support and proposing marriage. She knows that, in her struggle against her stepmother and siblings, she will need a strong ally, and her current husband is not one. She reveals her vulnerability and asks for help, but at the same time, she seems to surprise Damon with how far she's willing to go to remove her husband from the picture and bring about this marriage. She's matured over the years and learned a thing or two about palace intrigues and the brutal realities of the power struggle. Damon quite smoothly steps into the role of the future queen's consort and for a while seems like a supportive partner ready to defend his wife against her enemies. However, the situation begins to change with Rhaenyra's coronation. This is another turning point in their relationship.
Do you accept me as your queen and ruler?
Although, symbolically, as befits a royal consort, Damon submits to his queen, in practice, he finds it difficult to reconcile with the new power dynamic. He has trouble accepting that his wife is now clearly above him and that she gives the orders. He has aspirations to rule alongside her. He wants to take the reins, and we see him publicly questioning her ideas and decisions. This shift in the balance of power clearly doesn't suit him, and the culmination of this is the famous scene of violence that divided viewers. In the final episode of the first season, we see Rhaenyra confronting Damon about his decision to pursue war and bloodshed, while she seeks a more peaceful solution. And when it's revealed that Viserys shared a secret with his daughter that he never told his brother, Damon grabs Rhaenyra by the throat and begins to choke her. For many viewers, especially those inclined to interpret their relationship as purely romantic, this scene was a shock. They felt it didn't fit Damon's character, that he wouldn't do something like that to the greatest love of his life. But if you look at their relationship through the prism of power dynamics and how Damon has subordinated Rhaenyra from a young age, This outburst of violence is not so surprising, especially in a situation where the balance of power has shifted and Daemon finds it difficult to accept. Daemon perfectly fits the pattern of behavior of people who manipulate their partners. He can be wonderful and supportive when Rhaenyra is weak and suffering, because then she's dependent on him, but as soon as she becomes strong and gains even a little advantage, he tries to stop her and push her back into a submissive role, even resorting to violence. Was this a one-time incident? Many viewers believe it wasn't, and that Rhaenyra is too unimpressed by this outburst of violence to believe it happened for the first time. At this point, they've been married for several years, and Rhaenyra is no longer the girl she once was. She's grown up, learned a thing or two about power, and experienced relationships with men where, if anyone was on top, it was her, due to her station. She has her own opinions, and those opinions don't always have to please Daemon. And let's not forget that he's not the gentlest dragon in the pack and literally murdered one of his previous wives. The problem that Daemon has with accepting the new power dynamic becomes even more apparent in the second season. Sent to Harrenhal to gain troops and allies for Queen Rhaenyra in the upcoming war, Daemon starts playing his own game, and with each episode, it becomes increasingly clear that he's gathering an army for himself to enter the war as a third candidate for the Iron Throne, and therefore, he intends to challenge Rhaenyra. The second season tells us directly that Daemon has always wanted power, not just over Rhaenyra, but over the entire kingdom. His motivations were complex. As the second son, deprived of his mother's care from a young age, he felt neglected, pushed to the sidelines. That's why he was always acting out, recklessly, violently, and unpredictably. Daemon desires the throne not so much for power itself, but because he links it directly to his older brother's love and acceptance that he's been searching for his entire life. If Viserys had declared him heir, it would have been confirmation that he was important and loved by his brother, who was a father figure to him from a very young age. But Viserys chose Rhaenyra, and this casts an additional shadow on Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship, making it even harder for him to submit to her when she finally became queen. It took a series of disturbing visions and dreams to make Daemon realize where his desire for power really comes from. Reliving some elements of his relationship with Viserys and Rhaenyra, Daemon confronts the consequences of his actions, begins to see the mistakes he made, how he hurt his wife, and how he failed to support his brother when he needed him most. The final, prophetic vision Daemon experiences under the weirwood tree in Harrenhal finally makes him realize that his destiny is not the throne, that fate has some other role planned for him. Only then he decides to stand down and join the ranks of Rhaenyra's supporters again.
I cannot trust you, Daemon. I've never trusted you, wholly. Much though I wished to, willed myself to.
Over time, Rhaenyra increasingly understands that her uncle's treatment of her during her childhood was deeply inappropriate. We first see glimpses of this realization in the scenes leading up to her wedding to Lenor, and later in her conversation with Daemon on the beach after 10 years apart. But it becomes particularly evident in the second season when Rhaenyra confronts Daemon after his reckless decisions lead to the brutal death of a child on the Green side. Having completely lost trust in her husband, Rhaenyra admits that she's never been able to fully trust him, despite desperately wanting to.
And when I was a child, I took this as a challenge, but I'm older now. I have challenges enough.
Now Rhaenyra lets him know that she has seen through his hidden intentions. She fully realizes that Daemon sees her as a tool to seize the power he believes was taken from him. She understands that her husband is not the person she's wanted him to be, or maybe even believed he was while under his influence. This is another turning point in their relationship, a moment when Daemon feels he's ultimately lost control over her. He finds it so difficult to bear that he angrily flees to Harrenhal, coming dangerously close to outright rebellion and armed resistance against his own wife. Ultimately, this doesn't happen, and after a kind of a therapy provided by his visions in Harrenhal, Daemon bends the knee, almost a prodigal husband returning home. This opens up very interesting perspectives for the development of their relationship in the next season. It only takes a closer look at Daemon and Rhaenyra's relationship to see how many things are wrong with it. So why are we so tempted to see them as a pair bound by great love and destiny? Probably because from a young age we're conditioned or groomed by countless movies, books, and TV shows to perceive harmful behaviors as romantic gestures, and problematic relationships as great loves that must inevitably face obstacles. Daemon and Rhaenyra are surrounded by many elements that make it easy for us to go down this path and succumb to the illusion. They're beautiful, charismatic, and have incredible chemistry. They're positioned as protagonists, whom we're naturally supposed to root for. And the way their relationship unfolds evokes familiar patterns of TV couples in whom we've invested a lot of emotion, asking ourselves, will they or won't they? Daemon is probably the most interesting character in the entire series, and we love internally twisted anti-heroes or even villains who do unspeakable things for their chosen ones. But you don't have to scratch very many dragon scales to see the very problematic elements beneath this layer of pop cultural appeal. This isn't a relationship between two equals. It wasn't like that at the beginning when a grown man secretly trained his future wife according to his own preferences. It wasn't like that at its peak when Daemon, for his own gain, played with Rhaenyra's fate. And despite a certain change in the dynamics of their relationship, it still isn't like that now because all those years under her uncle's influence have taken their toll, and Rhaenyra, although stronger now, is still entangled in a relationship with a man who needs to control her and resents her lack of submission. Although we may be tempted to succumb to the illusion and treat Rhaenyra and Daemon as a pair of destined lovers, their relationship becomes much more interesting and complex if we examine it through the prism of the psychological mechanisms that are at work here. Thanks for watching. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell to get notified for more awesome content.